we're going to invite Taylor up here, and he's going to help us with a Q&A, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So we would love to know what questions you all have about this subject, about Kim's book, about writing a book yourself. Is there anybody who would be brave enough to come up and speak in this microphone for just a moment? And when I say brave enough, this is not a testimony time. I'm sure
When I was an embryo,
amazing things are happening in your life, but we've all been to that event, and this is not that event. So when you come up, if you could say, hi, my name is, and my question for Kim is this, and that would be awesome. Sound good?
My name is Ross Garrett, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having us. And my question for you is, as someone who aspires to auth, where do you start? Where do you take that idea from your heart to your head to paper, and then how do you lay the tracks for it to come out in a productive and constructive way?
Well, I don't know how productive or constructive I was. It's pretty circuitous. I think Bob would say the same thing. You usually don't have a linear, now I will write a book, and in 4 weeks, here it is. That has not been my experience. As for the idea, I look for something that just will not leave me alone. Like I'm talking about it with friends, I bring it up a lot. Every time anybody mentions this idea, I perk up. I get sassy about it, or my heart races about it. Those are usually good signs for me. And then I look for the best stories I've ever told or lived, and then try to loop all of that together. It's not a very clean process, but if you stick with it, it usually works.
Yeah, I would say I'm not much of a hunter, but if I were hunting pheasant, I would lead the pheasant. I would aim it in front of it, not where it was and not where it is right now, but where it's headed. So I would find books that I would write would be where I think culture is headed. So I'd say, what will be a year and a half from now? Where's everybody going to be at? And kind of lead the pheasant and just say, that's a gestation period. You can make a radish in 20 days, but it takes about a year and a half to get a book out there. And also, I would try to have things that are the book I need. So if I wrote a book undistracted, it's because I get distracted easily. If I wrote a book about, or available, because I'm trying to change the definition of how and in what ways. So Ross, I would say, take those things where you're headed, not where you are right now, but where you're headed, and to write into it, because it'll actually be your head's on a swivel. You'll find the stories that either support or negate the premise of the book, and then just capture all those. Great question.
Ross, I happen to know you a little bit, and I know that you and your wife are both two of the most creative people I've ever known, and so sometimes creativity can paralyze you a little bit because you have so many ideas. So my heartfelt cry for that would be to pick one. And you don't have to do it right away. I mean, Bob always says, find the fastest horse, right? So you can move into a few different areas or a few different ideas for a while. But after a certain point, I think you have to pick and just decide, this isn't going to be my magnum opus. I'm not going, we put so much pressure on ourselves to do the book. And I'd just say, do a book. Try that.
I have one last thought for you guys. How many of you are interested in writing a book down the line? Isn't that great? That's great. So write your stories. The thing that you connect with, the ideas, write those stories and see which direction they're all pointing. And then when you get to the end, you'll say, this is the name of that book. You kind of find out what direction are all the stories in my life that matter the most going, and then just try to intersect that. Yeah, great question.
Hi, my name is Enrica Greathouse, and my question for you is for Kim, and it is, you mentioned grace as a weapon, and maybe can you talk a little bit more about that, maybe some examples of what that means and how you express that in your book?
Thank you. That is a beautiful question. An unfortunate question, right, that we have to ask that. The longer I was unraveling this, I found that lots of folks had grievous stories of how people had used grace to manipulate the word grace, not real grace, pretend grace, fake grace, faux grace. You might need to edit this out, but the bastardization of the word grace. I don't think that's too strong of a word. Folks using that to cover up all sorts of abuse and racism and gaslighting and all sorts of ways. All sorts of stories kept coming to me of people who would say, I stayed in this really horrible place for a really long time because my pastor said I needed to extend grace. And that is not the grace that Jesus died for. It is not categorically no, full stop. Grace is a warrior. Grace turns on the light in a room. It does not turn it off, moonwalk out, and say, we'll pray for you. That's not how it works. The grace that Jesus did and does and completes for us is a completed, beautiful work that allows us total, bone-deep freedom. And somewhere along the line, just like all of God's best gifts, humans have used good things and warped them and said, oh, actually, this will be more convenient for us if you be quiet, and we're going to call it grace. I had a friend growing up who I have to be careful how much I include. Her story, sadly, is not super unique. She was a part of a church congregation. A person in leadership wooed her. He had his own family. He should not have been wooing her. He had no business doing this. And he used all sorts of spiritual language to encourage her to be quiet and to hurt her. And when this all came out, the church itself used a lot of placating language to say to her, you need to just forgive, we need to move on, and you need to extend grace. And that makes my body physically react because she had no choice in this matter, and it took her years to untangle the real Jesus out of that. So there is a chapter in this book called What It's Not. And it might be the most important chapter. It might be the most important one. The sweetest compliment I've been given thus far is from a dear friend who said to me, I had relegated this word to a shelf where I just wasn't going to take it off anymore because I've just seen it's been so overused and in such a dangerous way. It was kind of like a bumper sticker to me, but not a real thing. So the absolute heartbeat for me would be that we just take it off the shelf again. And amen.
Yeah.
I thought it was just God saying, yeah. That would be my heartbeat, that people would have the courage to take it off the shelf and decide who told me, who said this, who defined this for me. Because if we're looking at the way that God defined it, it's nothing but beautiful. So if there's been anything mixed up in the rest of that, it has to go.
Yeah, very good, very good.
Hi, my name is Jessica Medina, and my question is for either one of you, whoever wants to take this, or both of you if you want to answer it. When you guys said, or I can't remember exactly who said it, but it's, you're not a piñata, don't beat yourself up. I've noticed that I have friends that I notice it in them when they're beating themselves up, and I'll say, you know that Liar Liar movie? Like, you're not Jim Carrey. Like, what are you doing? I'm kicking my own. You know, do you mind? And your own booty. But I've noticed that I do it to myself. I can catch it in my friends really quick, and I'll just tell them that line, like, and it kind of like gets them to like realize, and they stop, because I'm like, no, you can't talk to my friend, you know, Kim or whoever is my friend that way. Like you matter. But with myself, I don't always do that. So do you have any tips around that?
I usually say to my own heart, be as kind to you, Kim, as you would to someone you love. And particularly for me, it's for my kids. I would never say to my kids, listen, I'd love to connect with you, but can you brush your hair and brush your teeth first, and I want your room to be clean? Like, I would never, ever, ever do that. I just want to hang out with them. I have an 18-year-old son who's gigantic. He's 6'3", and just all muscle, and I don't know how he is part of my bloodline, but when he's super funny, and I just love hanging out with him. When he says, Mom, let's go get coffee, I would never say, well, listen, I don't think I'm worthy, and I need to work on some things in my own heart and sin life before we hang out. I would say, let's go. I can't wait to get in the car with you. And so treating myself with as much kindness as I would to him or with him seems to work for me. It shakes me out of it. But I like the liar, liar line, and I'm stealing that.
Okay.
Bob, what would you say?
Oh, I'm just thinking of all the examples in the scriptures where Jesus spoke about who someone was turning into. Like, he didn't call Peter a wuss, he called him a rock, when he was actually a wuss. I've never even heard of Jesus, and the rooster is going off like that boat horn. But then Jesus said, like, I'm building the entire church on you. That just gives me a lot of hope and a lot of, like, third-party confirmation that we're a mess. But notwithstanding that, we're not the average of the 3 most insecure people we know. So I'm not trying to constantly say, like, if I took Sweet Maria on a date, there was no first date. I just wanted to go straight to marriage. But what if, like, 3 or 4 minutes in, I said, hey, how am I doing? And then after another minute or two, I said, hey, how am I doing now? Like, that would have been the last date. And God is not constantly holding up this scorecard, like 3, 2, 4. And so to your point, the point of the whole book, that God, we maybe don't need to be as hard on ourselves because God isn't scoring us. He's just available to us. And this is just more confirmation of our desperate need for a God that can just take us all messed up and needy. Yeah, great question.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Hello. I am Alicia Michelle. It's great to meet you. I am coming out with my very first book this fall in November. So I'm really excited about it. I wanted to hear from both of you about the idea of grace. You kind of alluded to some of it a second ago, and the idea of not looking at reviews. What are some of the specific things that do you find come up for you in this process of releasing a book, feeling insecure, getting all your stuff out there for everyone, and how can I prepare for it and get myself in the right mind space for it?
Here, while you're thinking of your response, I thought immediately of Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, because from it your entire life will flow. And so as a strategy, when I have a book coming out, I get my head into the next book so that I'm actually leading the pheasant. Like, I'm just headed, because that book, when you release it, it will be in the rear view mirror for quite a while. So just staying current. Just say that if there's a comment or criticism or whatever, that's who Bob used to be. That's who I was a year and a half ago when I wrote it. But I've found new ways to fail. New screw-ups. So get current with my new screw-ups if you want to be critical, and it's a target-rich environment. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I just keep surrounding myself with people who know me, the real me. It's a funny thing, Maria and I were just talking about the social media piece and how that's such an important part of being an author right now, that you have to be out there and you have to be chatting. And I said out loud to my family a couple days ago when I was doing the dishes, raise your hand if you're so sick of hearing about me and my book. And I raised my hand because I'm so sick of talking of my own. Yes. I feel like I'm saying so much about me. Yeah, exactly. So, I am so grateful to have phenomenal friends who absolutely know that I am really not that great. No matter what happens, they love me, period. Yeah. And so the output or production or sales numbers, all that stuff, that's not who I am. That took me a long time That took me a few books in to remember, oh, actually, I'm still cleaning the toilets out my house, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
So surrounding yourself with the people who know you and love you all the time, toilets and not. And then also, the time in the morning when it's just me and Jesus becomes like real important, because the rest of the day can go completely awry, but that time reminds me of who I am, and that this is like a blip. This isn't the end in any sense of the word. So
There's another really neat verse that's Zechariah 4:10. It says, "Don't despise small beginnings, because the Lord delights in watching the work begin." So just think about that as you're writing, those of you that want to write down, that heaven is leaning over the rails, because God knows how it's going to turn out, but the angels don't. The angels only know whatever God tells them. Check it out. And so if you want to dazzle the angels, dazzle them with your authenticity. Just so as you're writing things down, just like, I'm sure it just dazzles the angels that you're getting this book complete and out there. And for each of you, you've got some unique perspectives. And like, let's get that out there for people. Like, I know some of you, you've got some things to share. Like, get it out there. Don't be stingy about what you're learning. Great question.
Thank you so much.
Hi, friends. This is so much fun. I'm so
awesome. I'm already happy.
Me too. I'm so happy that Grace has captivated you. It's so amazing. But I'm wondering if I could hear stories from both of you of how God's grace has encountered you in this season and just moments in the secret place with Him. Yeah.
Are you going to make her say her name, Taylor? Because you busted Ross on that.
My name's Ashley Archer. Yeah.
I just was talking about this yesterday with my mom. That it's, I feel like right now in real time, I've learned anew. This is going to sound so ridiculous because I just wrote a whole book on it, but I've learned anew that grace is for me in every single season.
Yeah.
Now, right now. Like, not when the book's out, not when Mitch graduates from high school, not when Anna, my other daughter, comes back from Spain in a couple weeks, which is so cool. Not when, like, there's always another, right? There's always another thing. Is that the coolest thing ever? It is evergreen. It's all the time. It's every morning. I'm learning that right now. And I'm also learning to give myself a little bit of a break. I'm not always so good about that in really busy seasons. So I've had to say out loud to my family multiple times. So about the takeout, it's happening again. Anybody have an order again? And what I'm finding is the people in my life are way more willing to give me a long leash than I give to myself. So everyone's completely surviving on MSG and sodium and dried pasta, and they're fine. They're just a little fluffier than they were, but they're fine, and we're all gonna be fine.
Yeah, I have a story that comes to mind, and it's an example of grace where people wanted to put you at ease. My grandparents were very poor. My grandfather was a fireman on the docks in San Francisco who never put out a fire. I don't even know if he knew how to. And my grandmother worked as a switchboard operator, and so they had long retired when I was little Bobby Goff, and they knew I was very needy, in need of like just comfort and all that. So they told me they lived in a castle, and I believed them. They painted their house pink with white trim, property values cratered all around the block. They said, we have people who make our meals for us. It was named Swanson, evidently, and they had TV dinners every single night. And I'm like, they're living the life. They live in a castle. Somebody prepares all the meals for them. I mean, they died way too early with all the sodium. They could have been Lot's wife. But they would let me peel off the apple cobbler, you know, when you peel it back to brown a little bit. And that was a big deal because they didn't have servants that did that. They let me do that. That was just a really neat example of them filling in the spaces in a really beautiful way in my life. Because I grew up thinking I lived in a castle. And it was just an exercise of grace on their part. Great question. Thank you very much.
I'm Avari Noonan, and my question is actually for Kim. Sorry, Bob.
Yeah, we're here for Kim.
Like when you were writing your book and everything, did you ever have a moment like, like you had like this like fear or something, and how did you get past that or through that, and how did you show yourself grace through that moment of, this is scary, I'm writing this book, but you still did it anyways because we're all here today, so.
So good. Thank you. What a great question, Mavari. Is that what you said? That's a wonderful question, and you are really beautiful. I would say I had about 8 million of those moments, not just one. It takes a minute in a book writing. Bob alluded to this, that sometimes you write and write and write and don't actually know where the lighthouse is. You just hope that these stories will connect. And so I actually wrote a lot. A book of this size is about 70,000 words, and I got about 30 in and thought, I better print this out. I don't know what it is. And so I printed it out like an old person would do with actual paper and put it chapter by chapter on the floor of my office, and I put a Post-it note on every chapter. And I limited the Post-it note to be one kind of quick takeaway, like what do I know from, what do I want for the reader in this chapter? What's the thing I know? And when I did that, I read all the Post-it notes out loud and sat back in my chair and said, oh, this is a book entirely about grace. I didn't know it until I saw it all out there, and there were so many panic moments all along the way, and there were some that came afterwards too, but once I had that clarity, I figured I need it so bad. I need this grace so badly. I'm just going to, on a wing and a prayer, assume that other people do too. And so typically when I have a freak out session, I try to think of my reader. Usually the freak out is me. It's usually when I'm thinking too much about me, like what happens with me, what happens with my reputation, what happens with, whatever. Is this wasted energy, wasted time? If I can pivot and think, what do I want for the person holding this in her house, in his house, then I get over it. Because I know what I want for him, I know what I want for her, and then it takes the spotlight off of all of my insecurities. So
That's so good.
sometimes it works. I recommend it. Thank you. Great question.
Yay.